Construction makers.
When you go back and play some of these older action RPGs, the one that I've been exploring recently is Phantasy Star Online version 2. I've been playing it on the GameCube, even though I originally played it on the Dreamcast.
Wait, Phantasy Star Online 2?
Version 2. It's not Phantasy Star Online 2. That's a different MMO that is currently still played. This is Phantasy Star Online 1 version 2.
Yeah, and no one plays that.
So what's wild, you can still play it online.
Yeah.
Which it's like fan servers at this point. Sega shut the servers down forever ago. But anyway, so it's really interesting to go back and play some of these really old action RPGs and realizing that like they didn't have the formula figured out. So when you're playing it, you're like, where's the loot? Like you're not getting items in the same kind of cadence that you get them today, basically. Which I think honestly has its benefits and drawbacks. But the real like main thing and topic that I wanted to talk about is in the variations between. This relates to the idea of like thinking fast and thinking slow, or in strategy game terminology, the sort of micromanagement of your character and the actual act of playing the character. This is a whole book that is worth reading that is talking about this concept where our brains sort of have two different modes, right? Like we think fast, which means that we're acting more on instinct, and we think slow, which means we're acting more on strategy, longer term planning, those kinds of things. It's been a while since I read the book. There's a lot of other in-depth things besides that, but in action RPG specifically, they have this is a quintessential part of their play patterns, right? When you're playing your character, you're in tactics mode, thinking fast, you're in a flow state, you're cruising, right? And then when you're editing your character, you're changing your equipment, you're leveling up, those kinds of things. That's the thinking slow part of it. This is strategy. This is the overall long-term goal of my character and how I'm sort of moving through those steps to get there. So I wanted to take a look at modern action RPGs, strategies for this kind of structure, and then also, I guess, retro. I don't know what you would call it at this point. But
what could have been?
Sure. I feel like there was a fork in the road, right? And I want to talk specifically about like the direction that sort of Phantasy Star was on, and I don't know if they still are with Phantasy Star 2. I'm talking specifically about Phantasy Star Online 1. But there's a pretty clear fork in the way that these two systems are handling it. And it's also to see how modern game design practices have influenced these sort of play patterns.
How does Phantasy Star Online's loot system work?
Okay, so
how does the game work?
Yeah, so Phantasy Star Online, it is an action RPG. You go down to a level. You end up in like a section of the level that all the doors are locked besides the one that you came in through. You have to fight all the enemies that are in that area. Once they're all dead, the doors will unlock. You can then move to the next areas. You fight all the enemies again.
Is it linear, or do you decide like one of three directions?
I mean, you can go in different directions, but you'll inevitably end up at one exit.
Okay.
To the next, so the
so
forest.
It's a maze a bit.
Yeah, there's a little bit of exploration happening.
Okay.
After you beat Forest 1, then you'll find the teleporter to Forest 2. You fight through Forest 2, and then you'll fight the boss. And then there's the forests, there's the caves, there's the mines, and the ruins. And that's like the game. So the loot is like the point of playing the game almost, right? So you'll get common items that are white. You'll get uncommon items that are green. You'll get unidentified items that are blue and have question marks. And then there's actually rare drops. And the rare drops are exceedingly rare.
Because loot is based off of individual kills or based off of rooms?
So you have individual monsters that'll drop loot, and then you also have like boxes and barrels that you would attack and break, and they would have loot in them.
Okay.
So, I mean, you'll see 30 plus items at least, probably 30 to 60 any given individual level.
Oh, okay.
I think that part of this is them looking at the sort of unidentified items that you find as being that kind of pink noise that we're talking about. Like those are the peaks right now, but they're not particularly useful items. So the thinking fast and thinking slow loop part of this is you come down to the level, you basically fill up your inventory, and some of the items that you get are unidentified. And the only way to get them identified is to go back to town. So the play pattern that ends up evolving for me, and I'm assuming a lot of other players play this in the same way because I've played it online with other players that followed the same pattern, is that you'll pick up items until your inventory is full. You'll open a telepipe, and you'll go back to town.
A telepipe?
They're called telepipes.
Okay.
You go back to town, and then when you're in town, you'll go through your inventory, managing your character, identifying the items that you found that are unidentified. You have to go to a specific vendor to do that. There's no way to identify them when you're out in the world. You'll manage your character, change any equipment with the new upgrades that you got. There's also like no point allocation for leveling up. It just happens automatically. And then you'll sell the items, stash whatever items that you want to keep around, stash your money, and then head back out into the world, do it again. So this system is in contrast with what we would say is the like sort of modern ARPG flow, which is one that keeps you in the thinking fast much longer.
Which I see the logic there. Sure. And I understand how the industry, and in particular, I think where designers, like what games designers were learning from, I think that makes a lot of sense. Because there's this general sense that you get from some aspects of design or disciplines or whatever, that like you want people to be like either in a flow state or in a state of quote unquote fun for as long as possible, right? You find the fun and you throw it at people. That state of flow though is really great because there is a clear starting point and clear stopping point, right? When you're in it, you're barely even thinking about it.
To give a little history on the keeping players in a flow state, where that comes from, it comes from casinos. This is a tactic for keeping people at slot machines, that you want to keep them in a flow state because they will just continue to put quarters in the machine until they're out of quarters. So when we were discussing this before the episode, we were trying to think of an analogy for these two styles of play and a real world experience that is representational of of these.
If we can call casinos a real world experience, it is something you do in the real world, but it is.
Yeah. So one of the ways that casinos keep you in this state is that they don't have any windows, so you can't see outside of the casino to know what time it is or how much time has passed and how long you've been there. They put you in a little isolated chamber where you don't really think about the outside world. Where if we're thinking about something like Phantasy Star's approach, where there are these clear moments where it's like, okay, I have to go back and exit this flow state and move into thinking slow and identifying these items. This is maybe more akin to scuba diving, right? Where you go down, you're exploring this world, but there's a set duration that you have to spend down there. Maybe not as extreme as scuba diving, because if you spend too much time down there, you're not coming back up, right? So I do wonder about how much, like I said, modern game design practices have influenced this design strategy in terms of how do we optimize our pink noise, right? Is it I guess I should say the thing that I think has been lost, right, when I'm going back and playing Phantasy Star and evaluating how I'm feeling about it now, like 25 years later or some shit, the thing that I think is being lost is when I'm playing Phantasy Star and I pick up an item that's unidentified and I go, ooh, this could be good. I don't get that payoff right then, right? I continue playing until my inventory is full, because if I was like really excited about the item, yeah, I could just jump back to town and figure it out. But there is a resource, there's an in-game resistance to doing that because I'm not using my items to their most efficient. But as I said, you pick up these unidentified items and you get that first, ooh, that could be a good item, and then you go back to town to figure out what it actually is, right? So there's a period of sort of suspense, right, where you're like looking forward to going back to town to do the thinking slow part. Where I think in a lot of modern ARPGs, you're able to just identify that item in the moment. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just right click it or whatever, and you wait a little bit of time, and then, oh, I know what it is.
Yeah, I think that this is something, we've talked about this a lot, which is just trying to dissect, like, what was the purpose of unidentified items in the first place in these types of games. And I think that another key point of this is that, like, if you know that the item is unidentified, then you just keep going. You pick up the item and you keep going. But if you stop and every item did not have to be identified, then that means that the flow state is disrupted every single time you loot something. So you pick up an item and you have to go and you have to check if it's an upgrade. But like you're saying, it's like you don't stop until you know your inventory is full, which means that you have a longer runway before you end up having to actually disrupt that flow. Instead, you just can comfortably know, I picked up something, that's cool, I hope it's good.
You know, these games are trying to not interrupt a flow state, and then they're sort of unintentionally interrupting it anyway with, oh, I can figure out what that item was that just dropped now and do the thinking slow part of it while I'm supposed to be in the thinking fast part of it. And if I'm able to just sort of know and identify what that item is immediately while I'm out in the world and just standing there, I can then also decide whether or not I should be equipping it while I'm out in the world just standing there. And so we've sort of like broken this, we're no longer in extended period of time in flow state, followed by, maybe not as long, but a more extended period of time in thinking slow and customizing our character. Instead, it's like thinking fast, thinking slow for a very brief window of time, back to thinking fast again, and then again and again and again, flipping back and forth between those as items are dropping and being able to just be identified in real time. So I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know whether or not modern audiences would appreciate the same kind of play pattern that Phantasy Star Online has in a modern audience or not. Yeah. But for me, this is something that I'm looking towards as a potential for a future thing to experiment with.
I think we both kind of talked about this, that this feels like this is something that's kind of untapped a little bit. It's a very small thing because it's not just I think most people are going to hear this and be like, unidentified items, that's what you should do. And it's not so much about that as much as like imagining the experience, right? The idea of, well, right now you're challenging yourself. You're entering into what the objective or the obstacles of the game are when you're going out in the world and you're killing monsters or something like that. And then how do you balance that? Like, what's then the moment that you feel like you have to disrupt that? And are you comfortable with disrupting it? Are you excited to disrupt it? Or do you feel like it's a slog and you're like, okay, well, I just have to go back? Or do you feel like you just don't ever have to disrupt it?
This is something that I think has changed considerably in games. And that I do think that there is a lot of value in the previous structure. I'm just not sure what a modern interpretation looks like.
Yeah, it feels like what has been sort of forgotten is like there's a lot of these bite-sized games now. I was talking about like Marvel Rivals or other hero shooters like that and stuff that, yeah, it's you can play them for 10 to 15 minutes. There's games that you play for 5 minutes, a game of Marvel Snap or something like that. But Marvel Snap's different because there's deck construction. But it seems like there's a lot of these sort of bite-sized games that don't have the slow thinking part, right? Instead, it's just they want you to keep taking those bites of candy, but without that consideration in between. And what's interesting is that consideration in between is what gets you excited for these things. It's like planning a build for an RPG that you're going to do. Like I used to do this when I was younger, is like when I wasn't playing the game, I could plan to play the game so that when I got home, I was excited to actually go and implement those things and hop back into it. Where now there's these sort of smaller bite-sized games that like there isn't really that moment of like, oh, I can't wait to try this or do this or whatever. It's more of, well, I'm just going to hop in and I'm just going to keep
play it.
I'm going to keep snacking.
Well, thanks for watching our talk. If you like our videos here, you can like and subscribe. If you want to talk any more about the stuff we talk about here, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description below. We'll see you next time.